Imagine finding a critical bug in your software before you've even written a single line of executable code. I mean, it sounds kind of impossible, right? Well, today we're diving into a powerful quality assurance technique that does exactly that. It's all about prevention, and it's called static testing. And that really is the million-dollar question, isn't it? How can you possibly spot critical issues in your project, whether it's in the requirements, the design, or the code itself, before it's even a thing you can run? It feels a little like a magic trick, but it's actually a core discipline that the best teams out there absolutely rely on. So what does that actually mean in practice? Well, at its heart, static testing is just a systematic way of looking at project materials. Things like requirements, designs, and code without ever hitting the run button. The magic word here really is prevention. It's all about catching those errors, those weird ambiguities and design flaws super early, before they have a chance to snowball into these huge, expensive, complex bugs later on. To really get our heads around this, we're going to break it down into 4 parts. First, we'll nail down the fundamentals of what static testing is. Then we'll walk through the review process that really drives it. After that, we'll explore the different techniques and types of reviews you can use. And finally, we'll talk about how to make it all work to get the biggest impact. All right, let's kick things off with part 1. What exactly is static testing, and why do we call it a foundation of quality?
The easiest way to understand static testing is to put it right next to its opposite, dynamic testing. Think about it like this. Static testing is like an architect reviewing a building's blueprint. You're checking the design, the structure, the logic, all of it, before a single brick is laid. The whole focus is on the inner quality.
Right. And dynamic testing is what happens after the building is already standing. You're stress testing it. You're seeing how it holds up under pressure. You're focused on its external behavior. That blueprint analogy, that really makes it click. And this is where its power just becomes so clear. Static testing isn't just for developers staring at code. You can apply this to almost anything your team produces, starting from day 1 of the project. We're talking business requirements, architectural designs, test plans, even the user manuals. So it's really about building quality in at every single step, instead of just trying to inspect it in at the very end. Okay, so how do we actually do all of this? That brings us right to part 2, the review process. Because, while just reading a document sounds easy, the real power here comes from a structured, repeatable process. Exactly. At the very heart of static testing is the review. And that's a process that's driven by people. Look, automated tools are great for certain kinds of code issues, but they just can't replace a human brain. It's our ability to think critically that lets us spot those subtle ambiguities or logical gaps that a machine is just going to sail right past. And a formal review isn't just a casual chat over coffee. It's a real structured workflow. It all kicks off with planning, where you figure out your goals. Then you have the initiation, where you get everything started.
And then you get to what I think is the most critical phase of all, individual preparation. This is where everybody does their homework before any meeting happens. It's only after that prep work that the team gets together to analyze what they found. And finally, you close the loop with fixing and reporting.
A really good review also depends on everyone knowing their job. You've got a review leader who runs the whole show, the author of the actual work, the reviewers, who are basically defect detectives, and a scribe to write it all down. I think the facilitator is a role people often forget about, but it's so important. They aren't there to find bugs. Their job is to keep the meeting on track, keep it productive, and diplomatic. That's a huge piece of making these reviews actually successful. This is awesome. So, we've got a clear process, we've got defined roles, but I'm guessing not all reviews are created equal, right? And that brings us to part 3, techniques and review types. The approach you pick is really going to depend on your goals and how formal you need to be. That's exactly right. So remember that individual preparation phase we talked about? When a reviewer sits down to do that work, what do they actually do? They don't just, stare at the page and hope to find errors. They use specific structured techniques to make their analysis way more effective. So there are basically 4 main techniques to pick from. Ad hoc is the simplest. It's just an unstructured read-through. Checklist-based adds a lot more rigor because you're using a list of common problems to look for. And scenario-based is really cool. That's where you dry run a process. You mentally walk through a use case to see if it actually hangs together. Oh, and I love the role-based one. That's where different reviewers pretend to be different people, like an end user or a security expert or a database admin, to find issues from that specific point of view.
It is such a great way to uncover your blind spots.
Right. And these individual techniques, they all get used inside these broader review types, which basically just scale up in how formal they are. So an informal review is like a quick buddy check. A walkthrough is a little more structured, and the author usually leads it to share knowledge. And then you've got the heavy hitters. There's the technical review, which is a formal, deep dive with a bunch of expert peers, and then at the very top, you've got the inspection. That's the most rigorous, formal process of all. It's absolutely essential for high-stakes projects or when you're dealing with regulations. Okay, this is a fantastic toolkit. So for our final section, let's talk about the big picture here, making it all work. What does it actually take to get that huge payoff we talked about at the very beginning?
So what's the secret sauce? Well, it's not just about following the steps in a process doc. It's really about creating the right environment. From an organizational standpoint, that means you need management support, you need clear goals, and you have to give people enough time for that super important preparation phase.
But the human element is every bit as critical. You have to have the right people in the room, and this is the big one. You need a culture where feedback is about making the product better, not about criticizing the person. The whole goal has to be about learning, not about placing blame.
And when you get that culture right, the benefits are just huge. I mean, the single biggest payoff is a massive reduction in cost. Finding a defect in a requirements document is it's exponentially cheaper than fixing it after the product is already out in the wild.
Absolutely. And, beyond the incredible cost savings, it also just plain leads to higher quality products. And just as importantly, it leads to better communication and this shared understanding across the entire team. Everybody gets on the same page.
So let's bring it all home with one last comparison. If you take away one thing, let it be this. Static testing finds defects in the source material. Think of it like a flaw in the blueprint. Dynamic testing, on the other hand, finds failures. That's like a crack in the wall of the finished building.
That's the perfect way to say it. And it means they aren't competitors, they're essential partners. One prevents the defects from ever getting built, and the other validates that the final product actually works. You absolutely need both to build something great.
And that leaves us with one final question for you to think about in your own work. Take a look at your current projects. Where could a structured review, whether it's of requirements, a design, or even a test plan, prevent the next big problem before it even has a chance to start?